Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sunset TV. I'm Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference COP30, scheduled from 10th to 21st of November in Belem, the COP presidencies of Azerbaijan and Brazil have released the much anticipated report titled the Baku to Belem Roadmap to $1.3 trillion. Now, this roadmap converts the promise made at COP29 into a concrete plan, outlining how developing countries can receive $1.3 trillion annually by 2035 from all international sources. It lays out multiple options to scale up climate investment to this level. The roadmap identifies 5 action fronts on finance: replenishing, rebalancing, rechanneling, revamping and reshaping. It calls it the 5 R's to deliver the $1.3 trillion by the year 2035. As per the report, under replenishment, developed countries are to achieve manifold increases in the delivery of grants and concessional climate finance, including through bilateral and multilateral channels. Most importantly, multilateral climate funds are to be supported by strong replenishments towards fulfilling the decision to at least triple annual outflows from 2022 levels by 2030 at the latest, with a view to significantly scale up the share of finance delivered through them in delivering on the $300 billion goal. Under rebalancing, the creditor countries, the International Monetary Fund and the multilateral development banks will work together to alleviate onerous debt burdens faced by the developing countries, including through climate resilient debt clauses, debt for nature and climate swaps, other state contingent or prearranged facilities, providing support to reduce debt vulnerability. Under rechanneling, multilateral development banks, development finance institutions, public development banks and the multilateral climate funds are to significantly scale the availability and quality of catalytic financial and risk mitigation instruments such as guarantees, foreign exchange hedging, insurance products, securitization platforms and risk-bearing capital, including early-stage equity. Now, to revamp the financial architecture, this report recommends that governments should mainstream climate, nature and just transition objectives into planning, budgeting and investment frameworks, respecting national needs and priorities and aiming towards whole of government, whole of economy approaches. And finally, the report recommends that countries reshape financial structures for enhanced capital flows. The national supervisors and the central banks have to gradually embed climate stress testing requirements into supervisory reviews and bank risk management obligations. So while the roadmap has been set, the questions that now arise are: how will these recommendations translate into action? What financing pathways does the report envision? Also, how feasible are these options and how can stakeholders make sustained progress across these 5 action fronts over the medium to long terms? These are some of the aspects that we will explore in Perspective today with 2 distinguished experts. I'm delighted to welcome on the program today Ms. Ulka Kelkar, Executive Director, Climate Economics and Finance, WRI India. She's an economist who's worked extensively in climate change research, outreach and capacity building. She also works on low carbon development pathways, subnational climate action and just transition in small industry. Ms. Kelkar, delighted to have you with us on the program. Welcome to Sunset TV.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Dr. Manish Kumar Srivastav. He's an Associate Director, Climate Change at the Energy and Resources Institute, an interdisciplinary researcher focusing on the intersection of science, society and policy. His research explores issues pertaining to governance and justice, with a particular focus on the interaction of energy, technology, finance and environmental policy in multi-level governance. Dr. Srivastav, delighted to have you with us on the broadcast. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Let's start with you, Ms. Kelkar. The roadmap outlines $1.3 trillion annually in the next 10 years for the developing countries. The first question: how realistic is this target, especially given the unmet climate finance commitments that we've seen earlier?
Thank you very much, Tina, for having me on this program and really casting a spotlight on this issue on the eve of COP30. This is a very important UN conference, the 30th such edition since these climate conferences began. And the issue that everybody is talking about, that everybody's been waiting for, is really this issue of climate finance. It's called the Baku to Belem Roadmap. Belem meaning where the COP is happening this year, Baku meaning where it was happening last year. But actually, the discussions have been going on for much before that. And it's been a source of great frustration, great resentment, great expectations from developing countries towards developed countries. And unfortunately, this roadmap is now being released at a time of a lot of geopolitical tensions and a lot of diversion of funds by developed countries from climate and environmental issues towards military and defense issues. So, the question that you have asked about how realistic it is, well, it's at least something that there has been a statement of renewed commitment that has been made, an outline of a process that will play out over the next 2 years that will lead to the implementation of the ideas that are outlined in this roadmap. So, in a way, I would say it is not very concrete right now at the moment, but it is building on the work of a number of negotiating teams, and including something called the Independent Expert Group on Climate Finance, a high-level expert group. So it does build on a lot of discussions that have been going on over the last several years. So we are hoping that this indicates a commitment to making these ideas more realistic. But let's talk about some of the details that lie behind each of these ideas.
We'll delve deeper into some of the recommendations and what the report has also suggested in translating these recommendations into action, into tangible action, is something that we will talk in due course of the program. Dr. Srivastav, your perspective on how do you look at this roadmap? As Ms. Kelkar pointed out, that the Baku to Belem roadmap does try and attempt to at least turn a political promise into sort of a financial delivery plan. But from the perspective of climate governance, climate justice, do you think this plan could be a turning point as far as global climate finance is concerned? Or is it more aspirational at this point in time, given the geopolitical scenario in the world?
First of all, thank you for having me here and organizing this important discussion. I think there are 2 points to consider on the roadmap. One is that this is a roadmap that would be tabled for further negotiations. So we do not know yet whether this roadmap would be adopted or not at COP30. And yes, the continuing geopolitical uncertainties can come in the way of its adoption in the form it has been prepared. But having said that, I think the roadmap is a good starting point from the perspective of transforming the financial ecosystem globally as well as nationally in sync with each other. That would enable financial flows to climate action. But it does not necessarily mean that all of the financial flows would be from developed countries to developing countries, and that's something that needs to be kept in mind. The target was only USD 300 billion from developed to developing countries, and then from all sources 1.3 trillion by 2035. So if you go into the details, it is clearly expected that developing countries will also have to do a lot of institutional reforms in order to achieve that target. And that's where things are going to be very tricky. What happens first, whether there would be enough confidence to take that leap forward in developing countries is something to be thought through.
You're right. In fact, clarity on what portion of the 1.3 trillion will actually be concessional public finance. This is one issue that India had raised, particularly at COP29. Ms. Kelkar, India has repeatedly also stressed that climate finance should be new, additional, predictable, and it has argued that developing countries should not be pushed into more debt in the name of climate finance. Is there any clarity on some of these issues that India had raised at COP29 into this roadmap that the presidencies of COP29 and COP30 have released?
Yes, I think on the issue of debt, which India has been raising, there is definitely a recognition and acknowledgement in this roadmap that climate expenditure should not worsen the debt of developing countries. And this is particularly true for least developed countries, which are facing a lot of climate disasters or extreme events. For example, just now there has been a very strong storm in North America. And what we find that two things happen. Either these developing countries, when they are facing these climate disasters, they have to actually cut back on their climate expenditure and their investment in long-term adaptation and resilience because they're having to rebuild after the storm or some other extreme event. Or what happens is that they have to repay the loans that they get for climate resilience and adaptation. And they have to repay this in foreign currency, typically in dollars or euros, rather than their local currency. And this makes them more indebted. So there have been some ideas that have been discussed in the past about debt for climate swaps in a way that existing debt of a country can be exchanged for new investment in climate resilience, and it can be transferred into the local currency rather than the foreign currency. So some of the concerns that India has been voicing on behalf of the Global South have definitely been recognized in this roadmap. The larger picture is that, how do you count the money? There are some estimates which claim that $2 trillion of investment is already happening in clean energy. But this is not what you called additional. This is not what the government of India is calling additional. This is, in fact, if you go and buy an electric car tomorrow, that would also be part of this, finance of clean energy and clean mobility. The additional or the new climate finance that, right now the target is $100 billion from developed to developing countries. And this has to be per year. It has to go up from $100 billion by 2025 to $1 trillion by 2035. That's really the big question. Where is that finance going to come from?
In fact, India has also called for recognition of national priorities and differentiated development needs. Dr. Srivastav, does the roadmap allow countries such as India to decide how the climate finance is going to be used? Is there any clarity on that aspect? Because for mitigation, for adaptation, for just transition, there needs to be differentiation. Does this detailed plan envisage any of that aspect?
Well, I don't think the plan offers granularity on that. Barring the fact that it just says that it should be in alignment with the imperatives of just transition. But you see the question of climate finance and a lot of dissonance actually emerges from how and under what conditions, at what cost developing countries have asked for climate finance and with what conditionalities and at what cost the climate finance is being made available. There is that gap. So it is ultimately demand driven. So developing countries in theoretical sense have full control on what they want to use that money for. But whether the required amount of money is available at affordable cost in a predictable manner is something that will have to be seen. Let's take, for example, the Green Climate Fund. It was supposed to be a fund of funds and bring a paradigm shift. But one major criticism of the GCF has been that the transaction cost of accessing that fund is so cumbersome that it just keeps many developing countries and project developers from developing countries at bay, because there are requirements of proving transformative potential and so on and so forth. You have to go through a lengthy process, which really creates, which is actually counterintuitive to the purpose of for which GCF was established. So these are the modalities is something that always will need to be seen, and of course that was not the mandate of the action plan. It only sets out what needs to be done at the systemic level.
In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Kelkar, but during a press conference, the COP presidents, both of the COP 30 and the COP 29, they asserted that they were asked to prepare the roadmap. They've delivered that task, and that there is no provision of welcoming or negotiating this roadmap. Do you think if that does not happen, given that this report does have several gaps, it does not provide clarity on many of these aspects, do you think this could lead to a weakening in the manner in which the roadmap is going to be implemented henceforth?
That's a very tricky question, Tina. You're absolutely right in what you said, that the COP president has said that this is not going to be negotiated at this COP. Which means that we just accept it as it is, and it just lays out the steps. And there are a fairly detailed number of steps involving, different types of banks, financial institutions, multilateral development banks, and so on. And the final report is expected to come in the end of 2027, so 2 years from now. So they've laid out this process, and the hope is that everybody participates in this in good faith. But as I said, the current situation is a little bit, counter to the most optimistic scenarios. I'll give you an example. The Brazil COP presidency has really championed the cause of tropical forests, because Brazil it's very important to the Amazon rainforest. And they want to create a new facility, a financing facility called Tropical Forests Forever Facility. And so if there are indigenous communities that are protecting their forests, then they should be compensated for that through this financing facility. And they were hoping that the various developed countries will actually contribute to this fund, because the Amazon forest is protecting the climate for the entire planet, for all the countries. But just recently, we've received news that the United Kingdom has actually said that they will not be contributing this year, at least, to this fund. So that is a bit of a, it's a setback to the kinds of plans that the COP presidency has been championing for. And so that's why it does raise some questions, and it does require all countries to keep on negotiating, to keep on pushing, but also civil society organizations like ours to keep raising the importance of this issue, and to keep tracking whether the process is on track or not.
Absolutely. The framework that they have provided in the roadmap seems to be quite ambitious, and especially given the geopolitical obstacles that we've already spoken about. Coming to some of the steps which the roadmap hopes to translate into action, and one of them that I want to highlight, especially discuss with you since you're an economist, it gives a central role to the multilateral climate funds. It asks them to sort of triple their annual outflows by 2030. Help us understand what kind of reforms or systemic shifts will be required within the existing funds to deliver at that kind of scale that the roadmap talks about. Ms. Kelkar, that question is to you.
Yeah, so multilateral climate funds are dedicated institutions for climate action. As Manish very rightly pointed out, one of the pitfalls of this has been that the processes have been too slow. Each climate fund has its own processes. So a country, if it wants to get funds from GCF and then funds from adaptation fund, they have to follow different templates, different criteria, different project preparation documents, and this slows down the whole process. However, for India at least, we've been quite successful. I think we're one of the largest recipients of multilateral climate fund money. And just in October, just last month, 2 new GCF green climate facility projects have been approved for India. One is on startups that do climate tech, an incubation project for such startups. and the other is on climate insurance for farmers in agriculture. In July, also there was another new project of I think something like $100 million, $1,000 billion almost approved for projects in clean energy and renewable energy, and this is a dedicated facility for India. So India has been reasonably successful in accessing these funds, and we have dedicated authorities like NABARD in agriculture, SIDBI for small industries, and others who help to get this funding. But the biggest problem is that these funds only disburse what developed countries are putting into the fund. Right. And if developed countries are not meeting their contributions, and the largest contributor has been the United States, and the moment the new president came to power, they stopped. They announced that they would no longer contribute to these funds. So that is really the dilemma, and which is why the Baku to Belem roadmap says that we can no longer rely only on public climate finance. We have to leverage private climate finance, and all the institutions that are there have to reform their processes so that the processes are faster, the interest rates are lower. Developing countries can also play a role by providing some kind of risk guarantee assurances, which will reduce the cost of capital. And there can also be new sources of climate finance to replace the ones that are withdrawing. Just to give you one example, the new mayor of New York, who happens to be of Indian origin, has said that he will tax millionaires in New York at 2%. This is exactly the kind of initiative that is being talked about even for climate finance, and why not tax very wealthy individuals, billionaires, and so on, and use that tax towards climate action. Another innovative source is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. They have a special asset called special drawing rights, or SDRs. This is not a currency like a dollar, but it kind of acts like one. And in fact, starting from the COVID pandemic, they have been issuing additional SDRs of something like $40 billion for developing countries to increase their resilience. So these are the kinds of new ideas that have been experimented with, they have been piloted, but they really need to be scaled up, and the governance for these has to be put in place so the funding goes to who needs it the most and at the right time.
Certainly. How do these proposed reforms translate into action is something that we'll have to wait and watch. But on risk instruments, Dr. Srivastav, such as guarantees, blended finance, India has, in fact, in the past also warned against shifting risk to the developing countries while the profits flow to the global north. Do you see this detailed plan by the COP presidencies addressing this imbalance?
Well, the plan has a range of elements that talk about risk, and each of them needs to be understood slightly differently. For example, risk guarantees is something that India has been advocating very strongly. In fact, just recently, the International Solar Alliance, which is India's international initiative, has launched a risk guarantee mechanism for Africa, and domestically also, as part of the perform, achieve, and trade scheme, there was a partial risk guarantee scheme. SIDBI has a couple of guarantee frameworks and so on. They work really well in de-risking investments and encourage banks, particularly to invest in certain types of projects. So that is a different and a positive development. In fact, from Terry, we have submitted written couple of papers asking for a multilateral risk guarantee mechanisms, where a partnership between climate funds, multilateral development banks, regional banks, governments can arrange, provide guarantees so that the investments in climate-friendly actions can flow. And one important thing about risk guarantees is that if you look at the history of risk guarantee mechanisms, very rarely those guarantees are called for. So those are only political commitments without the amount of guarantees that you provide actually needing to be realized or spent. So from that point of view, these are very powerful instrument. But the other aspect which the roadmap has asked the IMF to rework, not only IMF but the central banks and credit agencies, to kind of reform or have a relook at the risk assessment in incorporating climate concerns. That is something that we would need to be very careful about, because that might actually work against the most vulnerable countries, because then the financial risk for investments in those countries could be, if it becomes part of the framework, then that could crowd out or make crowd out investments in most vulnerable countries or sectors. So that is something I'll be very careful about and watch with a lot of caution.
Okay, while it's a very detailed roadmap, it's very difficult to discuss the entire framework in a half-hour program. But just to wrap up the conversation, Ms. Kelkar, I'll take one last comment from you, because India sees climate finance as part of a larger climate justice debate. While this 5-hour framework coming amid geopolitical and structural obstacles that we are seeing in the world today, it is a welcome step. It does also acknowledge to some extent historical responsibility and equity. But do you think the larger debate on climate justice for the moment has been sidelined?
No, I don't think the debate on justice has been sidelined. In fact, I'm hopeful that the fact that the COP is happening in a part of Brazil, which is in the rainforest, where the local communities, indigenous communities, will be participating in the COP. I think these issues will be very much front and center. They will not be sidelined. However, yes, in hard money terms, the ground reality is that right now there's definitely a pushback. And so while the issues are being spotlighted, the means of implementation, the financial resources required to do justice to those issues are not really materializing. So in that sense, there is a gap that has been created right now. Just to give you a couple of facts, even in this particular roadmap, while they talk about the need is something like $3 trillion, but they say that $2 trillion of that is for clean energy, that is for the cutting back of greenhouse gas emissions, and $1 trillion, certainly 1/3 of that, is for adaptation, that is building resilience to climate impacts, for nature, and for just transition. So all of these issues, which are the more social issues, which are the more long-term resilience building issues, which are the issues that relate to the justice aspects that you highlighted, that you asked about, all of these are coming in 1/3 of the funding envelope that is being discussed, and the bulk of it is going towards areas which are really commercially can be funded. So I think what we will need to really be very careful is that we don't just pay lip service to the issues, we don't just leave it words, but we also really keep looking for ways to increase the funding for these, and then ways to disburse the funding to whoever.
You're right. And India has consistently pointed out towards that gap between pledges and delivery. Let's hope that this 1.3 trillion target doesn't just become yet another unfulfilled promise. So the action points that have been mentioned in the roadmap are followed by all stakeholders. With that, we'll have to wrap up this conversation. Time allows us to take up only that much on the program. Thank you once again, Dr. Srivastava, Ms. Kelkar, for joining us with your insights and thoughts. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well.
संसद टीवी के और भी प्रोग्राम्स देखने के लिए सब्सक्राइब करें हमारा YouTube चैनल और हाँ, इन्हें लाइक और शेयर करना ना भूलें।